open. I couldn't believe what I was reading, and I couldn't believe no one ever pointed out to anyone. And the reason no one ever points it out to anyone is exactly the reason that I just said. In fact, I'm not the first one whose jaw dropped open over this passage. You've heard of St. Augustine, haven't you? Of course, probably you've not read him, and I have to admit I haven't read him in great detail either. He's pondered his works and so on, but at least we should know when he lived. When did he live? He lived around the 400s in Carthage, in Tunis, in North Africa, and he documents his life and how he came to Christianity after first being a Manichaean and so on and so forth, with different religious groups. Anyway, he's living in the sort of early to late 400s. But his predecessor in Palestine is a famous church teacher called Jerome. So let's put him in the 5th century and him in the 4th century. You following me? Okay, Jerome is someone who's very substantial for the Catholic Church, so is St. Augustine. What's one of the main things Jerome did, you know? Well, he compiled the Bible as we know it, because he was an expert in manuscripts. And he had gone from Italy to Palestine or Judea or whatever you want to call it, and lived in Bethlehem for about, I don't know, 30 to 40 years, and he got all the manuscripts he could get a hold of in Hebrew there, and he studied Hebrew, learned Hebrew, and so on, and translated them into Latin. So the Bible that the Catholic Church uses, the Vulgate Bible, is based on Jerome's collection of the books of the Bible and his translation into Latin. So he's a very important sage, scholar, and so on. And he's very knowledgeable, though. He really is. I mentioned Eusebius earlier, who was Constantine. You have to always remember, Eusebius is Constantine's bishop. So he's also in the earlier 4th century, I would say then 3rd to 4th century. So that would be the succession of people that we're getting here in early church fathers. Eusebius writes the book History of the Early Church, where his whole first chapter, how many have seen Eusebius? If you look at it, his whole first chapter is called From Josephus, isn't it? He's got excerpts called. He's got the excerpt about James. He's got the excerpt about some of these signs for the fall of the temple, about the Jews eating their children, all this kind of stuff. All taken from parts of Josephus, where he's using Josephus in order to describe what happened in Palestine. So I often, in my Christian origins class, I just read Eusebius because he's called some of the most important passages from Scripture and from other sources that don't exist anymore in his time. Partially because he may have had control of the church he made the church under Constantine. He called the Church Council of Nicaea. He controlled the Church Council of Nicaea. He converted Constantine. So he's extremely important, but he has, the only drawback is a terribly anti-Semitic mindset. A bit like our Pacific Coast Highway friend, which is where he got it from. Unfortunately, I don't blame him. He just got it, passed down to him from these other sources, unfortunately. But I won't mention his name. Eusebius he and Eusebius could really find a lot to talk about, actually. So read Eusebius and you'll understand where that venom comes from. And that's not love, you see. That's not charity. That's not Christian love. That's venom. That's just pure venom. And that's a sad thing, really, for someone. What did Jesus say? There are ravening wolves in sheep's clothing. Well, I think these may be sheep in ravening wolves' clothing. I'm not sure, but the point being, that's not true Christian charity. Those kind of behavior patterns. That's all I would say about it. And hatred, certainly. You're supposed to love your enemies, even if they are your enemies. I don't see why they should be enemies. It's a father-daughter relationship, father-son relationship in terms of cultures. So the charity should begin right there. That's my view. If you're a real Christian, that's where charity goes, right from the get-go. Certainly the Lord would want you to treat his own people in the best way possible. I'm sure that if he were alive today and saw what had happened, he would be horrified. Particularly in the last century, he would just be like, oh my God, what is it? What is it that has spawned out of this whole thing? In any case, and the Islamic thing you're hearing now, which actually has similar roots, it would be horrifying to him. And you say, how can you speak in his name? Well, because we see him as the epitome of charity, that's why. I'm not speaking anything that I know that he isn't supposed to represent. Certainly doesn't represent the present-day Prime Minister of Iran. Any case, to go back to James and the passage, Augustine read this passage and he was like, aghast. It's the passage where Paul says in 1 and 2 Galatians, of all the leaders of the early church, I only saw James, the brother of the Lord, and Peter. That's in Galatians 1. So he doesn't know any of the other apostles or people except James, and he includes James as an apostle, of all the other apostles, he says. So he includes James as an apostle, which contradicts our apostle lists in the New Testament, but I'll show you that it really doesn't in the end, because James, the son of Alphaeus, I will show you, is supposed to be James, the brother of Jesus. But it's not revealed to us as such, but I can show you that, because there are 2 Jameses. If you know your apostle lists, there are 2 James. I'll be able to show you that. Okay. But in addition, in chapter 2, he says, let me see if I can get it right. When I first came to Antioch, we'll discuss which Antioch that is. I don't think it's the normal Antioch. When I first came to Antioch, Peter was in the habit of eating with the nations, eating with the peoples. In other words, eating with peoples of foreign background. I'm not advocating James or Paul's or Peter's position. I'm just telling you what the document said. But after the sum from James came down, and he uses that pejorative, the sum is something Paul always uses to put people down. And another passage earlier than that, in the same letter, he says, the pillars, these pillars of the early church, James, Cephas, and John, or it might be the other way around. John, I think it's James, Cephas, and John. Cephas, K-E-P-H-S, is supposed to be Peter, because in Aramaic, Cephas means also